Ghost. What a week. What a week. All right. Man, the news this week too that I had saved for the stream, wild. Wow, and now like there's no way I can keep it. You know, there's no way it won't expire by next Saturday because it just keeps getting more wild and more wild. Part of me wants to do another stream in the beginning of the week, but I doubt it's going to happen with everything going on. But what a crazy news week, man. What a crazy week in the media. Absolutely insane. That's my head. All right. All right, we're in 1 Corinthians 7. Yep. Wait a minute. People trickled in this week. I have a built-in green screen now, which I didn't even think about until Ghost said something to Cat. I did not even think about it. I think as long as I could get some light on it, it's good to go. There we go. It looks way darker because all the lights are off and the only lights that are on are like directly on my face. And that's why I tried to set up the green screen to take it away. It won't work. I have to put a light on the floor towards the green screen, towards the wall, and then it'll be bright. It's because the lights I have, Cat, are garbage. It's like the cheapest, worst lights you can get. So eventually, when I can replace those, I think it'll be different. I think that would improve everything quite a bit. Super delayed. I mean, it's always delayed. That makes sense. You're going to hear me in the house before it goes through the stream. If it's more delayed than normal, I'll have to look at it. Graves, good to see you. Good to see you. Yeah, they have some decent lights that are like $100 a pop. The ones we got, I don't even think we paid $100 for both. And when you watch people talk about like streaming, they say the literal lights that we have are like they're like the shit lights that takes heat. It's like that's all we were comfortable spending money on. The floof. The floofer. Yeah, we have garbage. Eventually we'll get some good ones. I will wait another minute and then I'm just gonna roll. Unfortunately, and I say that because not a lot of people are here because the week has been dead. This is a really good chapter with a lot of the super hot takes in it. So that's unfortunate. Because I think it would be some good conversation. Some of the real hot takes from Paul are in this one. Wild. I'm just gonna go. I don't want to wait because I have to be off like promptly at 7, so we can keep putting our house back together. So this is 1 Corinthians 7. Let me get my voice out of my ear before I lose my mind. All right, 7. So far, the predominant theme has been sexual immorality. It's Corinth. So it's been sexual immorality. The other main things that this church has an issue with is there's like, I guess in today's terms it would be a wealth and inequality gap. They have that. Many of the Christians in the church are very wealthy, meaning that they have high status. They're also kind of on that wise philosopher kick, which is a part of another problem, which is that there's a lot of false theology, false pastors, preachers, whatever you want to call them, that are pushing ideological concepts that are similar to Christianity, but are not Christianity, making it heresy. But those are the primary things. And on the lower end of the class scale, you have people who are fiscally poor, but also because of that, it makes them socially poor. And also because of that, it means that they are also not a part of the wise philosopher club. Overview. There. Now going into 7 principles for marriage. A lot of key stuff. Honestly, real good stuff. So we might talk about this again next Sunday, just because it's important. It's a place where I feel like a lot of people, they get issues with Christianity and they get issues with Paul from these sections. So he says, now concerning the matters about which you wrote, the things about which you wrote, the actual exact nature of the questions that the Corinthians were asking him, we don't really know, because he's responding basically to what they had said or what they had written him, and we don't have that. So we have to draw it from context. However, his responses that follow, they make it seem as though the inquiry that the Corinthians had was, in a broad sense, broad strokes, was related to matters of marriage and also sex. And that becomes relatively obvious. So although it's not said, it's fair to say. He goes on, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, period. Period. Some translations will say touch a woman. Same thing. The Greek text uses an idiom, actually, to in which it refers to having sexual intercourse with a woman. It may not imply marriage. There's a difference. So it could include marriage, but the text contextually, it doesn't necessarily imply marriage. So in the Greek, the idiom does not necessarily relate to marriage, but it can. Verse 2, but because of the temptations to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The Greek word there is the same that we have in English drawn the word porn from. It can refer to illicit sexual acts or behaviors. It doesn't always, though, but it can. Paul also may refer to prostitution, which he did in the section previous, so that would contextually make sense. Some female believers may have, based on context, they may have been depriving their husbands of sexual relations. And again, that will become a little bit more clear as we read on also. So in response, what seems to be happening in Corinth, as the men are seeking sex elsewhere. So to say that in a very simple sense, it is believed by most scholars that this section is about women withholding sex for whatever reason. It doesn't really matter. It's not really talked about, but women in a marriage are withholding sex. And the result of that has been men being tempted and then following through with the temptation outside of the union. So I'm not getting enough sexual gratification from my wife, therefore I am going to go sleep with a prostitute or just with another woman. That's basically what we're looking at, and then I'll explain more as we go on. Verse 3, the husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. That's where a lot of people will stop, because that sounds like a hot take, and that gets people upset. The funny thing is, it's said again, reverse. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Why or how people are ignorant enough to take the first half of that and say the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does, and then walk away, blows my effing mind. Because it's like, stay for 2 more seconds and you see that it levels out. Woman does not have authority over her body, her husband does. Just like the husband does not have authority over his own body, the wife does. It's absolutely equal. And it's wild that it gets ignored and it gets pushed. And regardless of the context it gets pushed. It gets used by men to say that women need to submit in that sense, which is not biblical submission. And it gets used by non-Christian people, normally secular people, to say that Christianity is some shit religion of men wanting absolute sexual power over women. It makes no sense. That's not what it says. It's very equal. Paul talks about this problem of unsatisfied husbands seeking fulfillment from what we can believe is probably majority local prostitution. It could be that they're sleeping with other guys, sure. But greater context of all of this, the entire text, 1 Corinthians, makes it seem most likely that at least the predominant issue is that they're seeking sex from local prostitutes. Also knowing that just in a general context of what Corinth was, what the culture was like, that's the most likely outcome, is that they were seeking prostitutes. So in Paul's perspective, in Paul's view, married men and women have entirely pledged themselves, both emotionally and physically, to their spouses. Therefore, they have authority over each other, and they don't have the authority to deny each other of sex. That's the general thesis of this, is you are not your own as soon as you become a part of a marriage. And you are to give because the other has authority over you. And not just women give because man has authority over them. It goes absolutely both ways, so says the text. 5, do not deprive one another. He's continuing on with the theme. Do not deprive one another. Except, perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Another translation for this, instead of do not deprive one another, that I think is interesting, is do not defraud one another. That's one where the theme doesn't really change, the message doesn't really change, but it's an interesting choice of word, because there is an assumption when you become a part of a marriage. Now, it varies from couple to couple, but there's a general assumption that when you become married, at least on the male end, and without getting too like dating culture, marriage culture about it, men have an expectation of sex. It's a huge expectation for men. It's the way it works. It's the way it works. Just like I would assume, not being a woman, so projecting my beliefs about women, and correct me, ladies, if I'm wrong, but I think most women have an expectation that men will provide the same type of support or need fulfillment in other areas, like in emotional support. It's kind of, I would say that's the general belief from both parties. Men are more driven physically, women are more driven emotionally in general. And so we expect when we get into a marriage that you're going to have those things for the other person. So he's in 5. Sorry, I had to look at something real quick. In 5, he uses the word, in another translation, defraud, which again, I just think is interesting, because you're entering into a contract, a covenant with expectations. And defrauding someone is kind of an interesting word for it. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but it's an interesting term. So he's advising all the married couples in Corinth, all of the believers in Corinth, not to deprive each other of sex, just in general. Doing so, he says, can lead to temptation. The only caveat is that if there's a devotion of prayer, devotion to prayer, where a married couple stops and they say, for a time, we are going to, instead of use this energy to fulfill our physical needs with one another, we're going to pull back and we are going to enter into a time of prayer, of meditation, and we're going to abstain from it. It's really no different than like fasting. It's the same type of concept. There's a lot of deeper things about it, but to not derail, it's a similar concept. People will refrain from eating certain things or eating altogether as a form of prayer. Married couples can do this in the form of sexual abstinence as well. So he's advising them to practice abstinence within marriage only for the expressed purpose of a limited amount of time and for a season to focus on prayer, which just means to focus on God. And then he mentioned Satan. So the Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. The type of sexual deprivation that this would be within a marriage provides a very easy foothold. Is kind of what I feel like that's the most common answer you'll get for that, is that sexual deprivation. And it gets tough because the reality is this is predominantly for men. If we're being honest, it's predominantly for men, but you're not going to read that in a commentary. In a commentary, it's all going to be point blank. Don't deprive each other of sex because Satan will take a grip on you. As if that's an excuse for like infidelity or sleeping with a prostitute, which has always bothered me, but I'm going to try really hard and not go down any rabbit holes. So that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. It's a whole Thursday topic. So I'll write it down and we can come back to it at some point on a Thursday. It's a very long conversation of, is there ever a time where even if your wife or your husband is depriving you of sexual anything, gratification in any way, does that mean that there's an excuse? It seems as though almost it's an excuse. I don't know. I've just never liked it. But again, it's a long conversation we could have another time. It's a very deep conversation. I argued with someone for like several hours when I was in school about this. Verse 6. Now as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God. One of one kind and one of another. So a concession, it's an advisement. It's not a command. And it's important to kind of make the distinction in any of the epistles when Paul specifically is demanding something of them, or when it's more of a concession. It's more of him saying, this is something I advise. But you have my favorite word, adiaphora. There's gray. Then he said, could be like myself. He said, I wish that all were as I myself am. Paul, from everything we can tell, was an unmarried man. We have no reason to believe he was ever married. There are some theories out there. There are some interesting theories about Paul's history and things like this. I've never been able to find anything that satisfies like a burden of proof or even reliable resources at all. So to me, they're just theories until proven otherwise. But he considered his ability to remain celibate a gift, which is why he mentioned the gifts there. Each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. He considered his celibacy, his lack of being in any kind of relationship, but specifically a sexual, physical relationship, it was a gift to him. For Paul, his singleness, his being alone, allowed him the freedom to do his ministry, which is accurate. I mean, anybody who's like is married or has been with somebody for a very long time, even if you're not married, and it's not good or bad, but the reality is that like your life is totally different if you have another person in your life that you're sharing it with. What either a man or a woman can do if they're alone is very different from what they do if they're in a union. And for somebody who's doing ministry and someone like Paul, who is going to be traveling always, moving from place to place to place, planting churches, going back to visiting the churches, it probably is a gift that he didn't have a wife that he was also responsible to, and that he didn't have kids through that wife that he was also responsible to, because that shifts things. He wouldn't have had the freedom to live and do ministry the way that he was. His own gift from God, there's an implication that married believers should remain married and continue to fulfill their marital obligation, which is why he considered his lack of marriage a gift. But those unmarried believers who don't have trouble with sexual desires should remain single. Yeah, we'll read more about this. So 8, to the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single or to remain unmarried, as I am. So unmarried, the Greek word that was used, it's used 4 times in the New Testament, all right here. The word refers to someone who has no spouse or is in a state that may result from where that singleness is a state that may be from several different circumstances. So it could be the death of a spouse and now you're unmarried. It could be being deserted by a spouse and now you're unmarried. It could be after a divorce and now you're unmarried. Or it could just be that you were single and so you're remaining single and therefore you are unmarried. Regardless, interesting in that the Greek word in the original transcript, it's not used often. It was used a handful of times, period. He continues though, he says, as I am. 9, if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So they should marry. What he's saying is the solution to somebody who does not have, as he says, self-control, if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. Because the solution to not being able to practice self-control, meaning the inability to stay away from sexual immorality, the solution is marriage. So those with the gift of celibacy, which is somebody who can fight it against or just naturally has the self-control or lacks the sex drive and has no problem being single and not partaking in some kind of sexual immorality outside of a marriage, they're good. That's their gift, Paul says. But for those of us who don't have that self-control, the only way that we're not to be ruled by sexual immorality, from what Paul is saying, is to be married. That's the solution. And then he said to burn with passion or burn with sexual desire, depending on your translation. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's lust is all that it is. And lust inside of a union is not, biblically considered a sinful thing. Lust outside of a union is obviously considered a sinful thing. Verse 10, to the married, I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. One thing to note about that, it's important to pay attention to that. He doesn't always do this, but when he does, it's a very important thing to watch. Is that a lot of the time Paul is giving advisement or commands from himself. Is what it is. You can still say that he's being inspired by God, which is the general Christian belief. However, something that I've always found interesting is that why does he then differentiate sometimes? And there are theories, and we can talk about it if you guys want at some point, but it's an interesting thing to keep note of. He doesn't always do that. So when Paul says to the married, I give this charge, not I, but God, it's a very definitive statement that he's saying, this is not from me. This has nothing to do with my lived experience in being a minister. It has nothing to do with my lived experience just in life as a man. This is straight from God, period, making it a command. Not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And this gets us into 100 other things, or one of 100 other things, that gets pushed out into the Christian space all the time, that if you actually just read the text, it's really not that confusing. They need to learn self-control because a spouse can become sick. A spouse can become sick. She can become pregnant. Men suffer with, low testosterone, which makes their sex drive die. There's a million reasons why, either a man or a woman in a marriage would not want to have sex. And I think to some degree people have to talk, because to some degree you do need to satisfy each other. And if one partner is providing all the satisfaction that the other needs and the other is not providing the satisfaction the one who needs, it's very nuanced, but people just need to talk. They need to talk and figure out a way how to satisfy each other, because that's a healthy marriage. But I think for someone to just be pissed off all the time, or if your wife becomes sick for 3 days, and doesn't want to have sex with you and you lose your fucking mind about it, yeah, it's a problem. That's a lack of self-control. That is just a failure of the individual, in my opinion. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and then the husband should not divorce the wife. So, he's addressing wives first, not wives only, but wives first. Probably, again, there's a reason, probably because women brought the issue up. Contextually, it would make sense. So he's responding to the women first. Women in the Greco-Roman society that Corinth was subjected to, they could separate from their husbands. It was something that was allowed. It was permitted within this culture. But this was not the custom in Jewish tradition. So in Greco-Roman tradition, it was no big deal. It was normal. It was allowed for women to separate from their husbands. However, in Jewish tradition, not so much. So within the Christian church, which is what makes it interesting, kind of harder to follow, is that you have a mix of those. You have the Greco-Roman culture and also Greco-Roman people. And then you have Jewish culture and tradition and Jewish people. And you're bringing them all into the same group, and you're trying to figure out how to make them all live together as Christians, quote unquote. So it gets confusing. Then he said she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. It's not a normal command. It's not an ordinary command. This actually refers back to seeking the gift of celibacy that he was just talking about. However, this is one that I feel like has a lot of women messed up. She should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. What I've always heard and have been asked 100 times from divorced women on social media is, I went through a divorce. Am I now not allowed to get married and be right within the Christian faith or be living under biblical tenets? Can I not get remarried? Is my only option really to go back to the guy that I couldn't stand? I couldn't live with anymore for whatever reason? No, that's not what he's saying. It refers back to what we were just talking about, which is why if people would just take the entire thing, it's not that confusing. It's not that difficult. He's referring back to the gift of celibacy. So he's not prohibiting all remarriage after divorce. That's not what he's saying. He's encouraging people to keep the freedom that he had rather than seeking another spouse. He's not saying you can't seek another spouse. He's saying the ideal thing to do would be either to reconcile with that individual that you already were bound to, or, in his opinion, you should seek celibacy, which is the freedom. But he's not necessarily prohibiting all remarriage after divorce. It's not what's being said. And then it says the husband should not divorce his wife. Moving on, though, and then we'll smash it all together, because it's the not I but the Lord part. If you take that and then just read 11, you're like, what? But God said that. Paul said that God specifically said this. So isn't that exactly what he's saying? No. So just hang on. 12, to the rest I say, not I, but the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. Some married people who had converted to Christianity, but their spouses did not, were at this church. It seemed to be a pretty prevalent thing. Again, remembering, this was not an epistle to every Christian that would ever come after this time it was written. This letter was written to the Christians who were at Corinth at that time, and not a day later. So if somebody joined the Corinthian church a day after this letter got there, the letter is not necessarily to them. Some things may apply to them still, for sure, just like some things still apply to us today. However, many of these direct statements, direct commands, had nothing to do with anybody other than the specific people that were at the church and were specifically asking him questions. And so he was answering questions to them specifically. So specifically, some of the married people at Corinth who are now Christian, They converted to Christianity, but their spouses did not. So the Corinthians were asking for Paul's counsel with that issue. It was a struggle that they were dealing with. So they specifically asked Paul to answer them about their specific situation. The consent to live with him trips people up a lot. It's a euphemism for marriage, which I get gets lost in translation to English. But she consents to live with him is just it's a euphemistic way of expressing the concept of marriage. And then he said he should not divorce her. So Paul applies the same instruction from verse 10 and 11 to believers who are married to non-believers. In this specific instance, if an unbeliever or if a non-believer chooses to stay married to someone who is a Christian, the couple should not seek divorce, which goes against everything you've ever heard. That if you're unequally yoked, which is a verse that's used out of context in the context of marriage, if you're unequally yoked, you shouldn't get married and you shouldn't stay married. If you are now converted to Christianity and your wife or your husband is an unbeliever, there's a huge population of Christians who would tell you you should get divorced because technically it is grounds for divorce, but it would need to be them leaving you. But regardless, people will push you towards divorce because you're not with somebody who's Christian. That's not what the Bible talked about. That's not what Paul talked about, at least. Maybe take the Bible out. Paul at least did not say that. He's applying a very similar thing from 10 and 11 to unbelievers as well. But if an unbeliever chooses to remain married to the believer, the couple should not seek a divorce. If the unbeliever decides to remove themselves from the marriage, that is what you I guess call it's grounds for a quote unquote good divorce in Christianity, where you didn't do anything wrong. 13, if any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him, for the unbelieving husband is made holy because of the wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, which just means they're not believers. But as it is, they are holy. So another translation, I think the NIV uses sanctified in one of those sections. So is made holy. Some believing spouses at Corinth seemed to have been concerned that the sexual activities with their unbelieving spouse would be considered defilement. So it seems that there was a thought that if I'm a Christian at Corinth and my wife didn't convert, but we're still having sex, that would be seen in Christianity as a sort of defilement. That's the fear that they seem to have. So Paul's explaining to them that it's not a defilement. Instead, it is their unbelieving spouses who are sanctified through the process of knowing and being with and being married to, being bound to someone who is a Christian, who did convert. It doesn't mean that the spouse is Christian, but it makes their union, their physical union, at least in Paul's expression, it makes it not a defilement. I hope that makes sense. So if you're a Christian, you converted, you're at Corinth, but your wife or your husband did not. By being with you, your physical interactions are sanctified. However, it doesn't make your spouse who's unbelieving a Christian. It doesn't make them say, it doesn't give them salvation, to use common Christian terms. They don't have salvation through that, but they're sanctified. Your physical relationship is sanctified in that, from what Paul says. Then he said, otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy, meaning that also extends down to your kids. You having kids, again, old culture thoughts would be if you have kids outside of a religious union. Judaism was like this, where if you had kids, one was a Jew, one wasn't, you guys had kids, your kids would be, they'd be unclean. They'd be unclean. Paul's saying, no, if you have a believer and the unbeliever is with you, the unbelieving wife or husband is sanctified through you. Therefore, if you have kids, your kids are sanctified through you as well. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. So if you converted to Christianity at Corinth, you're at Corinth, your wife or husband did not, and they choose to leave you, so be it. Verbatim, so be it. Let it go. It's fine. That's good. Because it probably is. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. Interesting terms. The believing spouse is under no obligation to maintain the marriage with an unbelieving spouse. That's it. So, actually, give me a second, and then I'll sum it all up. They're not enslaved. So you as the Christian are not responsible to maintain a marriage with an unbeliever if they decide that they no longer want to maintain the marriage with you. God has called you to peace, for how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? The believing spouse may have the opportunity to participate in the conversion of the unbelieving spouse. It's possible. In that way, the believer becomes an instrument or a vessel that helps the unbeliever toward God. Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So there's a potential for your unbelieving spouse to come to understand God through you, for a lot of different reasons. If they come to church with you, or you pray with them, or whatever that is, you just being in their lives, assuming you're walking the walk and not just, one of these assholes nowadays. I'm kidding, but one of these Christians who doesn't actually uphold the Bible. You just kind of wear it as a label, and it doesn't mean anything. But assuming you're truly dedicated to what you believe, and it shows, and you talk to your unbelieving spouse about it, there's a potential that your unbelieving spouse would come to understand God through you. However, if they choose to leave you, so be it, quote unquote. Everything is fine. I was under the impression that you cannot remarry as long as the former spouse is alive. What verse? We read one of them just now. So if you just came in, you may need to rewind. Or actually, let me find it. Here it is. Here it is. I hope you're still here. So verse 10, to the married, I give this charge, because I'm not going to read the live as you are called. We're going to save that for next week because I don't have much time. So I'm going to go over this part again. The healed homemaker said, I was under the impression that you cannot remarry as long as the former spouse was alive. So we already covered this, so I'll just reiterate it. If you have a specific verse that you're talking about, though, because it's mentioned a couple times, then give me that and we'll get into it. But what Paul just said prior, you must have come in after, was, to the married I give this charge, not I but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. Beautiful. All right, so he's addressing the wives first. And then again, I gave some context that in Greco-Roman society, a female, a wife, leaving the husband was permitted. It's okay. In Jewish tradition, that's not a normally okay thing. In Jewish tradition, it's not normal at the time. It wasn't normal for a wife to be able to just leave her husband. In Greco-Roman society, it was. It was totally fine. So actually, let me think of how I can say it in a different way, because you can rewind and see what I said before. So I'm going to try to say it in like a cleaner fashion, I guess. But if you go back to 6 through 9, there's some back context. But what he's saying here is he's not prohibiting all remarriage after divorce. Everything in 1 Corinthians has been pretty cut and dry. He's been pretty clear. He's gone so far as to repeat himself over and over with great specificity. You don't get that here. But if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife. There's no actual prohibiting of any remarriage, or of all remarriage, I guess you could say, after a divorce. Instead, contextually, what it seems that he's saying is that he's encouraging people to be free in Christ just as he is, rather than seeking another spouse. Because if you remember before, his whole thing was in 6, now is a concession, not a command. I say this, I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. The gift that he had, that he believes was a gift from God, was his ability for celibacy. His ability to have the self-control, or to not have the interest in seeking sexual gratification, which allowed him to perform ministry better. One of the other interesting things, when you take the greater context of the entire New Testament, is that there's a big push for people not to get married at all. Is that if you have the self-control to not get married, and Thessalonians talks about it a good amount, you were actually pushed to not get married at all, but to stay single. And there were a couple of reasons for it. The biggest reason was that marriage can hold you back from ministry. Because I was talking about before how if I, as a man, I'm out of vocational ministry now, have been for a long time, but if I was still an active pastor at a church, also have a wife, also have kids, my duties, responsibility, attention, it's all split between all those things. I can't just devote myself to ministry, because I have a wife that I'm responsible for. I have kids that I'm responsible for. My time and attention is split across all of those. What the New Testament in general seems to push is that the most ideal situation is for you to stay unmarried, because then you can perform ministry more adequately. Your time and your attention can be purely devoted on pushing the gospel. And at some point on a Thursday, I guess we could cover this in depth. But there's a lot of different areas in the New Testament where that, I feel there's a very good case for that. A very, very strong case for that. Across several epistles, as well as in the gospel, is that your ideal situation, male or female, is to be unmarried so that you can perform ministry and spread the gospel. And there's a lot more to it, but I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. But that's kind of the theme. So then Paul talks about his own celibacy, because he was able to do his ministry most adequately, was because he was not devoted also to a wife. He was not devoted also to children. His time and attention was wherever God led him. And there was nothing holding him back, so to speak, from moving around doing ministry whenever, however he needed to. I mean, Paul was fleeing from places because of persecution. That would be harder to do if you had a wife or kids. It's just a reality. It's harder to do. It doesn't mean you can't, though, which is why the New Testament also gives direction of, okay, well, if you're going to get married, this. But even here, he's telling people, don't get married. Unless you lack the self-control, don't get married. But if you're able to practice self-control, don't get married. If you can't practice self-control, you should get married so that you don't fall into sexual temptation. You don't fall into sexual immorality. But again, if there's another verse about divorce, because that's on our list to talk about on a Thursday, is the whole divorce thing. Whether Christians can get remarried after divorce, what are the stipulations for it? The most common kind of belief, in my opinion, from what I hear, is that the only stipulations for divorce, actually the only stipulation for divorce, is if an unbelieving spouse, they start the divorce. So if I married an unbelieving woman and she filed for divorce, then technically I'm clear to go get married again. The biggest question you have to ask after that is, okay, what if a woman is abused physically by a man? That's not covered in the Bible. There is no explicit section in the Bible that says, in terms of divorce, a woman is clear to get remarried if she is physically abused by her husband. That's not there. So would you say that a woman who is physically abused by a man, Christian or non-Christian, if she gets divorced, which is a beautiful thing because she shouldn't have to live in that situation, is that woman not permitted to get remarried? Just because what? Crappy luck? It would have been better if your husband just left you because he was an unbeliever. Sorry you had the shit beaten out of you, but you can't get remarried because the Bible doesn't explicitly say it. No, I mean, that's just not how we read the Bible. That's how people read the Bible when they're being subjective and they're being brainwashed. There are plenty of things we deduce from the Bible based on aggregate, where theologians and scholars and pastors over the past 100 years have taken a subject or a topic They've aggregated everything about that subject or topic, and they've deduced a general principle from it. And then they push that out through all the churches of America. And then that is what is believed by the general public. It's not based on their own research. It's not based on their own understanding. It's not even based on their own reading of the text. It's based on what a pastor said on a Sunday, or what a youth group guy said to a kid that really caught his attention. It's believed based on how catchy the delivery was, that's what I believe, because that's what I saw when I was in vocational ministry. The more flashy, the more catchy, the more one-liners that rhymed you could figure out how to say, you could get them to believe, clap, cheer, and amen to anything. It's an emotional thing versus this, where you sit down and you pull every single one. You're like, okay, what can we aggregate and deduce? What does actually the Bible say about divorce? Because really, it's not a lot. The Bible doesn't say much about divorce at all. There's a few spots, a few little areas that give you some kind of understanding of what it was. All that to say, based on this and other sections, all of the other sections in the Bible talking about divorce, I don't believe, and do your own research. Actually, don't Google it. Don't ask YouTube. Go into the Bible and find, it's very easy to look every verse about divorce in the Bible. Find all of those, pull them, and figure out for yourself. However, for me, based on all of them, and then all of the New Testament together collectively in terms of marriage, there's no reason, in my opinion, to believe that Paul here is prohibiting remarriage after divorce. Rather, based on the previous context of him talking about his personal gift and his opinions about really the only reason to get married in this section is if you have no self-control and you're going to fall into sexual immorality, it seems more so that he's pushing people into celibacy. That if you do get divorced, you should stay celibate. You should stay celibate because that is the best thing that you can do. And if not, you should try to reconcile with the spouse that you already got married to, which I think is a reasonable thing to say. But in no way does any of it prohibit remarrying somebody else or remarrying in general, remarrying a new person. There's nothing. We assume that, which is what you have to be super careful of. We're just assuming that's what it means. But just because he doesn't explicitly say it, it doesn't mean that. If we did that with other things, the Christian church would be, oh wait, it's wild. It's ridiculous. It makes no damn sense what Christians believe anymore because they do exactly this. They assume so much instead of just saying, okay, we know this, we have no idea about this. What do we think makes sense? And then keep that as I just think this. I don't know this. I just think it, which means there needs to be a bit of adiaphora, a bit of the gray area, where we see maybe that would be good for her in her divorce, and maybe that wouldn't be good for this other woman in her divorce. Maybe if a woman was abused physically, even though the Bible doesn't explicitly say that it's okay, maybe it is okay if she meets a really good guy at a church or wherever, a good Christian man who's going to take care of her and give her a family, and she finally has like a good life. Maybe that's okay. Because the Bible doesn't explicitly say that woman is to be alone and celibate for the rest of her life. In fact, what Paul said 2 seconds ago, maybe that woman specifically that we're talking about in our hypothetical, maybe she lacks the self-control to abstain from sexual immorality. So doesn't the Bible explicitly say she should remarry? It's just not that clean cut. Sorry to rant for a very long time about it, but it's just not that clean cut. There's so much gray, and that doesn't mean that things are okay. It doesn't say that are okay, but it means that we can't just assume things and then make them Christian law, even though most people have no idea why we decided that was Christian law. They just make it up. Kat said, I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but I fully believe that you aren't with your soulmate if you go through with the divorce. Some exceptions to that, perhaps, but that's what I think. That's an interesting conversation. The soulmate thing is a very interesting conversation. That would be a good Thursday too, is to talk about the concept of a soulmate within like a Christian perspective. I mean, I agree with that though. Nat, good to see you. That's one area where I feel like the at least Catholic Church is shockingly accepting. They make a lot of effort to annul support groups for divorcees a lot more than other sins. Yeah, that's good. You're right. That is something that the Catholic Church does pretty well about. The other thing though is like depending on the Catholic sect that you're in, a lot of Catholics just won't acknowledge divorce at all. They'll just pretend like it doesn't exist. So like even if a couple gets legally divorced, I was around it for a bit when I was younger. The Catholic Church would not recognize the divorce. So they would still consider them married. Even though they filed, it went through, the kids had been split up. They're living in different states. It was a really odd thing, but maybe nowadays that's more of like a fringe of the Catholic world. I don't know. I'm not super in the Catholic stuff at the moment. As a single mom, I find the idea of remarrying terrifying at times, especially with all the widespread abuse of children. I think it's a valid fear. Yeah. I think it's a valid fear. I think that comes down to more like, where are you looking? I guess, in my opinion, would be more, where are you looking? Are you looking in the right places? But even then, the cold, hard, sick reality is that even in a church, what should be the safest place in the world to try to find a partner, even in a church, there's a non-zero chance that a man you bring into your life might abuse your kids. It's a non-zero chance. But does that mean you shouldn't try? I don't know. I would say you should probably still try. If you feel like called to be married, if you don't, then maybe you're what Paul's talking about and you're meant to be celibate. Maybe there is something you're supposed to be doing that marriage would truly and genuinely get in the way of. In which case, I think it would make sense. I think it would make sense to just stay unmarried. But I don't know. Something I guess, on an individual basis, you just have to think about. Kat said, maybe I'm biased because I'm fortunate enough to be with my soulmate. You're a doll. I couldn't fathom getting divorced. Joe would have to cheat on me for a divorce to be pursued, which he wouldn't because duh. Yeah, very true. No, I mean, I can't think. Yeah, it would be cheating. It's the only thing I could think of that would cause us to get divorced. Would be and I just can't imagine how that would happen. But beyond that, I can't think of any other reason. Yeah, I mean, outside of the church, the community is hella judgy. Gotcha. Okay, well, that makes sense. Lilith. Yeah, the frames dropped pretty significantly, but it looks like it's fixing itself, so we'll see what happens. If we get cut off, I'm out for the night. So anybody who, like, the Healed Homemaker, I don't know if you're already in Discord with us, or if maybe you're someone I know and you changed your name. If you're not in Discord with us, you should definitely jump in Discord. There's a link in the description of the video, and then I posted it in the chat just a minute ago too. Discord is free, but it's where all these lovely people hang out and talk. So I'd consider that if you're interested. Now I can't see. There we go. Yo, that's so valid. Allowing another man into my home with my babies. Yikes, I can't even out myself in that situation. You'd have to really love and trust them. I give you credit. Yeah, I mean, it's a scary thing. It's a scary thing. I would like consider if Kat and I did ever get divorced, and which isn't gonna happen, but hypothetically, if that ever happened, and it was just like me and my kid, even as a guy, I'd have a really hard time bringing like another woman around her at all. So I say that to say, like, as a woman, I couldn't even imagine how horrifying that would be. As much as like most men aren't crap. Most men aren't going to come and abuse your kids. I don't think that's most of them. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'd like to think most men are similar to me. And like, I couldn't fathom hurting a child. I can't even, it's a thought that just doesn't process. I'd like to think the majority of men are like not inclined to hurt children, either sexually or otherwise. I'd like to think that, very much so. But regardless, the statistical possibility of a male coming in as a stepfather and hurting the kids is pretty high. And the messed up part about it is that it would probably be sexual abuse, which is the worst possible outcome. Whereas a lot of like stepmothers that come into a kid's life, the statistics are still high. Don't be deluded. Where stepmoms come in and are abusive to kids too, but it's usually emotional abuse and then maybe like some physical hitting and stuff. Very high statistics, but still, I'd argue like sexual abuse is obviously on a very different level and is way, way more damaging, way more scary. I could not imagine being a single woman with kids and then trying to like navigate bringing a new guy around my kids. Hat off to you for trying. But I'd still say, like, if you're a single mother and you feel like being in a marriage, being the provider of security and home and all of that for kids and a husband is like what you think you should be doing, I be careful, but I think you got to do it. And that's not directed at you, healed homemaker. That's not directed at you, but just in general. I think if people are called to, or if they know, like I knew I wanted to be a dad and I knew I wanted to be a husband forever. I've always wanted that. I've wanted the responsibility. I've wanted the placement. I've always felt like that was a big part of my purpose, was to be in that role. And so no matter what, I was going to figure that out. I think it goes both ways. Joe, I really hope this isn't an inappropriate question, but do you and Kat share your daughter biology? I know. And so, unless I'm confused about what you're asking, Zaya, my kid, is not Kat's, no. But Kat's been with her since she was 1. So Kat's been her stepmom since she like couldn't walk and couldn't really talk. So she's been here the whole time. You'd have to try real hard to ask us a question we'd shake. She isn't mine. No, she is my gremlin child, though. You don't give birth to them, they just show up. Was clear on whether you just never get married until now, or she came before. Yeah, no, so I mean, it's a Discord story, I guess, at some point. I don't want to share the story on YouTube. But at some point, if you ask me that in the after show, because maybe not, you haven't been around. So actually, real quick, guys, let me give the spiel, and then I'll tell you when we can talk about this at some point. So if you are watching this later on a recording or a healed homemaker, because I know that I don't recognize you, there's a link to the Discord in the description. There's a link to, or in the chat as well. It'll be pinned to the top at the end of the video. But we have a Discord. That's this right here. If you don't know what Discord is, don't be intimidated. It's an app on your iPhone, Android, whatever. You can get on the computer. And then it'll take you straight to this area, which is just where everybody talks and kind of hangs out. So the most important part, or the most helpful part, is the events tab. This will tell you when stuff is going on. So every week we do 3 of these. Tonight is Bible study. That's why you see that right here. Then on Thursday, we do kind of a topic-based discussion. So we'll usually, the Discord group, everybody will vote on a topic, and then we do that topic. So that whole hour to 2 hours on Thursday is just going through whatever the topic of the day was. And then Saturday, we talk about all the news from the previous week. So we do Sunday night, Saturday night, and Thursday night. Every stream is at a different time, so be mindful of that. It's always at a different time. But that's all that. So anyways, now we can talk about all that stuff in a Discord group. So after the first hour of a live stream, we're always going to move to Discord now for the last half hour to an hour. So 1 hour of it will be on YouTube, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then 30 minutes to an additional hour will be on Discord in the little red section down here. That'll be every stream. So during one of the Discord talks, we can talk about some of Kat and I's personal stuff. I struggled a little with remarriage after I divorced an ex after going to Bible study again. They went over the fact that he didn't love, like Paul said, to love like Christ loved the church. Yeah, which is what we were talking about last week or the week before last week with the whole submission bit. Should women submit to a man who's not submitting to God? I think some of the divorce aspect can be related to that. In theory, it could be related to that. Because, for instance, and then I got to get ready to go. But for instance, the man we were talking about who's physically abusing the woman is a Christian. Man says he's a Christian. Man is physically abusing woman. Woman decides to divorce man and get away from him. Is she allowed to remarry? If you take it the way most Christians take it, which is going through the Bible and looking for a specific allowance of it, you're not going to find it. You're also not going to find a specific disallowance of it. However, that's what we've chosen to go with as Christians. So if the believer who is a wife who's being abused decides to leave the husband, most Christians would tell you she's not allowed to remarry. There's no reason to actually believe that at all, other than it's been shoved down the throats of all the pastors throughout all of America and then shoved down, downstream from there. There's no reason to think that biblically at all. At all. And then you can make the argument of, is a man who is physically abusing his wife, who says he's Christian, is he actually Christian? If I beat the shit out of Kat every day and she decides to divorce me, is she not allowed to remarry? And am I actually a Christian? If I beat my wife, I would argue no, you're not a Christian. Because the Bible does specifically say that somebody who claims Christ but continues to perpetuate the same evil over and over is of the devil. So I'd say you're not a Christian. And then that would at least, even in the cultural Christian space, would mean that woman who is the abused is allowed to get remarried because the unbeliever left. It's all based on nothing, I guess is my point. Our beliefs as Christians about divorce are based on nothing. They're based on very thin, nondescript sections in Scripture. I was a single mom. I was super careful. Now I've been married 20 years. That's awesome. My husband adopted my son, then had another together. Happy ending. Kelly. See, that's beautiful. So, healed homemaker. That's a beautiful thing. Beautiful example Kelly has of, albeit scary, a very good outcome. That's an awesome outcome. Doesn't get better than that. Maybe one day we'll share our story. Yeah, at some point in the after show we will. Sorry, I haven't been paying too much attention. I'm definitely going to watch it. Yeah, if you get time. It was a good one. A lot of this stuff, though, man, you don't need to, because there were a few things I kept notes on, and I'm going to add them to the poll list for Thursdays down the line. Because there are a couple good topics in here. Divorce being one of them would be a good Thursday topic. Shame, shame, shame. Yeah, everybody shill homemaker the Discord. Here, I'll leave the link, homemaker. Here's the Discord link again. And if you need help with Discord, ask somebody. And then there's a tutorial on there as well that I recorded. I can find it. If you tag me in anywhere in there, I'll get the tutorial and I'll give it to you. But yeah, great outcome. Great outcome. This absurd situation assumes that Joe could beat the shit out of Kat. Oh, why didn't I see that coming? I should have saw that coming. We're cool sometimes, I guess. It's a good way to describe us. Sorry I missed the other newbies, but y'all must join the Discord. Yeah, for sure. Got to get in there. All right. Anything else? So I guess thank you all for being cool about this past week and us canceling the past 2 streams. I'm sure you've seen on Discord what we've been dealing with, but that's where we've been. and I just really didn't want to miss tonight. So as soon as we're done, I think we're going right back at it. Maybe not. Maybe we'll take the rest of the night off. But it's been a long week. It's been a very, very, very long week. So thank you for being understanding. We are good to go, though. Back for normal schedule. So Thursday, as a reminder, it's going to be a really, really good one. So in the streams and lives under Thesis, which is Thursday night stream, what we are talking about is this one right here. So God changes over time is my theory. I've explained the theory before. I'm not going to explain it now. We'll talk about it on Thursday. But if you want to read about it ahead of time so that you can put together, if you want to be a part of the actual conversation, and homemaker, since you're new, usually during these streams, you can just come on and talk, which if you hang out with us long enough, you'll understand what I'm saying. But everybody has the ability to come on and talk, like vocally. So it's like a group call when we do these. So on Thursday, I'm going to give my theory for why I believe God's involvement in humanity, in the world, in creation, has changed over time. God hasn't changed, but I believe his involvement in humanity and his creation has changed from the Old Testament to the New Testament, from the New Testament to what we call current modern day. That's my theory. So on Thursday, I'm going to lay out my theory, and then anybody who wants to come on, either in chat or on voice, can come in and pick apart the theory, poke holes in my theory. So I put, some information here on kind of the general basis of what I'm going to be putting out there, so that if any of you want to go do research this week ahead of time, because you're like, no, I don't agree with that point, go collect your evidence, bring it back on Thursday, and then you can present a response when I go over that point. The whole purpose is that, for me, is that just because somebody went to seminary like I did, just because somebody was a pastor in a church like I was, doesn't mean they know a damn thing about anything. I truly believe that. With everything in me, I believe that. I think it's a cop-out. I think we put pastors and theologians, or people who have gone to like formal academic seminary, I think we put them on pedestals, and what has resulted from that is Christianity has become brainwashed, because someone like me who has the documents can come on here and tell you this is truth and you all are going to believe me. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. So the whole point, I hope, is that you guys prove me wrong. At least prove some of it wrong. And I think that some of it will get picked apart, and then I think it'll become a very interesting conversation. But that's my hope. So that'll be Thursday. It'll be real, real good. I'm planning for a full 2 hours on that one. I'm preparing for that because I think it'll go really deep. So Thursday, Saturday, again, if anybody who's not normally here with us, will be culture and news. We missed it last week. Freaking wild week of news. Wild stuff. So I might keep some of the stuff from this past week to next week, but we'll see. And then Sunday night, we'll do Bible study like normal. Nat said, quick prayer request for Nick. He's becoming Catholic. Oh, the poor guy. Totally kidding. Especially for homemaker. Totally kidding. Baptized and everything Saturday night and Holy Week is huge for Catholics. We have a big week ahead. Please pray for his guidance. So maybe we need to know your story too then, Matt. Maybe over the next month or two, we'll have like an informal stream just in Discord and like kind of go over personal stuff so we can get to know each other more. I feel like kind of in passing, we've gotten to know each other. Like I knew your husband's name was Nick, and I've seen some things about him on social media, and I've seen your cute baby that actually puts every other small infant child to shame. Your baby makes most babies look so freaking ugly. You should like have to pay a stipend to all of the other ugly baby families because your baby is extremely, extremely cute. But anyways, I think at some point we should do like a very informal Discord get together where we just kind of like Q&A, personal life, whatever you're comfortable talking about, obviously. But like, I think that'd be good. We'll do that at some point. Or maybe the end of a Sunday night. At some point, we'll do that too. But anyways, that's really good. That's a beautiful thing. But I'm very curious, like, what did Nick believe before? Was he like totally out of the game? Or was he like a non-denominational Christian? Or kind of what was Nick's thing? I'd be curious. So hopefully sometime we can kind of go over some of this personal stuff. I think it'd be good. Occasionally cool. Trademark. Come on. Wait, going out to eat that evening. Hope I'm home in time. Oh, girl, you might have to be on the recording. It'll be 2 hours for sure. So maybe you can make it into the end. And she knows she's cute. She's seriously though, she's really cute. You have a super cute baby. It makes me want to have a baby. And that's not something I normally say or feel when I see babies. But your baby is phenomenally cute. It's atrocious. It really is. It really, really is. All right. Anything else last minute? Otherwise, I'm going to roll. I'm going to help Kat finish up some of this stuff here. Homemaker, if you're still here, I hope we see you in Discord. I guess we've had a couple other people wander in there. The number's gone up a little bit. Mainstream media headline: Radical Christian ginger attacks ugly babies. That's a solid headline. Solid headline. That'd be a great like series of memes. Because I feel like I say a lot of things that can be taken out of context pretty good. That'd be a wonderful series of memes. Would just be like a still shot of me talking on the stream, and then just big words. Headline: Radical Christian ginger attacks ugly babies during Christian nationalist live stream. I said, uh-oh, and then I'll have to argue with trolls in Joe's Instagram comments. Oh, I was telling Kat about that today. I was telling Kat about the rockabilly or whatever the hell his name is. You know what he said today, actually? Hold on. Because this was super entertaining. And then I'm out of here. Oh, never mind. I'm not going to be able to show it. What he said was, he commented today, Nat, the same guy. And I've known this guy for a long time now, because he'll come out of the woodwork. I'll kind of shut him down, and then he'll go away. He'll recede into the depths, and then he'll come back out because he gets ballsy again or something. I don't know. But what he said today was, you are probably a right-wing actor paid to run right-wing social media accounts who doesn't actually believe anything. Sick way to make a living, man, especially given the moral value of what you promote. To which I said, I don't get paid anything to do social media. YouTube pays me, some dirt every month, but social media pays nothing. I don't make $1 on social media. So I'm like, if you know where there is somebody who's willing to get me on a contract so I can get paid to post the stupid stuff that I post on Instagram, please hook me up with these individuals, because I'm doing it wrong. I didn't know you could get paid when you have 12,000 followers on Instagram. I don't believe that's the threshold to being a right-wing media presence. Although, again, if there is anybody out there who would like to pay me for my Instagram posts, I am absolutely for sale. As long as I can keep saying the things that I want to say. I'm down, so find me. He folded real quick after I answered his questions. Yeah, he always does. I was kind of proud of my response. You guys have seriously made a great impact on me. I felt really well equipped to handle. That's beautiful. Yeah, no, you killed it. I was telling Kat, like, Nat destroyed this troll that is always in my Instagram comments. It was very entertaining. Because you were totally respectful, too. You weren't an ass about it. You were just very matter of fact. And it was a beautiful thing to sit and watch. It made me very happy. It made me very happy. Because that guy just goes off. He just gets off on going off. And then, like I say, he'll disappear because his pride gets hurt. And then he'll get ballsy again for some reason. And he'll come back. I usually try to be nice to him and just kind of like respond matter-of-factly. But sometimes I get a little bit emotional. And I'm not the kindest. And so I've come back and apologized to him a lot of times, actually. I've left a nasty comment. I don't delete it because I meant to say it. And in real life, you can't just delete something you say that's not nice. So I leave it up, but then I reply to my initial comment and I say, look, that was a little bit harsh. I apologize. However, the principle behind what I'm saying, I stand by. But I could have said it in a nicer way. And for that, at least I apologize. He's a funny guy. And I feel like he's one of the ones. Yeah, is that his name? Is it Fake Rockabilly? It's Rock and Romanticism is his name. Rock period and period romanticism. Don't go me mean to him, but if you follow me on Instagram, you'll definitely see him because he lives down there in the depths of the comment section. I'm sure he's a nice guy. You know, he just seems kind of lost. He seems to be captured by a specific political ideology. Like many. Like many. All right. I'm going to get out of here in just a second. Remember, for Saturday, what is this week going to be? 324. Do I not have that ready? Oh my God. Me being ahead of time is now no longer ahead of time. All right. I'm going to get the section for culture and news up. So just remember, if you guys find any articles throughout the week, a short video, an actual article, something on Twitter, I can't do TikTok because I get copyright strikes for it, but Twitter is okay. Any mainstream social media, or I'm sorry, mainstream media platform or anything like that is okay. Remember that you can always come here to the culture and news and throw it in there so that we can pull it up. I think besides that, we're all good. So I'm going to roll. I'm going to go help Kat clean up. Thank you guys again for just for understanding. It's been a wild week. So I appreciate that, but we're back to normal. So Thursday will be real good. I have some more stuff that I'm going to post in the section for Thursday. So you might see more come in here. And anything else you guys think of, throw in there. But it should be good. I am out. Everybody have a lovely evening. I can't stand fake people when are in my music, like rockabilly and punk rock. What? I'm lost, Graves. But he is a punk. So, he's a punk. Have a good week. Good to see you, Nat. I hope we see more of you again. And Thursday like normal. Should be very good. Love y'all. Good night.